How the Light Gets In is the Institute of Art and Ideas' unique festival, combining days full of talks and debates in philosophy, politics, arts and science, with evenings full of music and dance. Get your tickets for the world's largest music and philosophy festival at HowTheLightGetsIn.org.
Here, I'm going to have to play devil's advocate to myself because, yes, there are, for example, negative conceptions that race can involve, and you can try to change language in order to get people thinking about those negative conceptions in new ways. But something that I've often said, and I just stole it from Steve Pinker, is something called the euphemism treadmill, which is that thought has a way of catching up with language and destroying whatever you were trying to do. And so the process that you're talking about, Stanley, it's true that you can start thinking about things in a new way when you give something a new label. But the label is generally going to wear out, and the thought changes more slowly than the language. And so, for example, I'm going to pick something at random. Home relief. If you were talking to somebody in 1950 who is a mother at home with children, and the government gives her money to take care of the children, that was called home relief. And if you think about it, that's a very nice term. After about 15 years, people were spitting out the word home relief, and it almost sounded like, roach poison or something. And so that changes to welfare.
Yes.
That's by the mid-60s. And nowadays, in terms of the way welfare is discussed, you have to work to think what a warm word that is. Welfare. But then it became welfare. And so now, what a cash assistance is the way one is taught to talk about it. That now sounds kind of blank. Give it about 15 years and it'll be the same thing, because certain feelings about government assistance in some quarters persist. And so until the thoughts change, the language, the way I think of it is, yes, change the language because it does get people thinking, but realize that each term is only going to last for about 20 years. And so, for example, you were a Negro, and there were associations. Change it to black. Okay. Then somebody decided in 1989, I never quite understood it, that it's supposed to be African American. That's now rather worn out, and I've heard that some people are now going back to black. I'm one of them because I liked that. That was fine. We're going to have to keep changing it until the negative perceptions erode.
Sometimes those changes are in fact planned, and planned by forces that we might not admire. I woke up one morning to realize that the word gambling had disappeared in relation to casinos and other operations.
What is it now?
And now it's gaming. Gaming.
Yeah, that's
if
true, yeah.
you listen to gaming and you think, well, yes, it's a game, and everyone likes games, and all the associations with gambling of crime and the destruction of cities, etc., all of which are absolutely true. All of those associations were put aside by the word gaming. So I've never investigated this. I wonder, was there a high-level conference of wealthy casino owners, perhaps including Donald Trump at one point, who got into a room somewhere in Atlantic City where there were, in the end, many rooms vacant, so they could say, let's do gaming. Let's substitute gaming for gambling. There's a Republican strategist by the name of Luntz, who was a master at this. Frank Luntz, who turned oil drilling into fuel discovery, and he did things like that all the time, and they work. So that the rorting advice of changing language, which he, of course, issued from the perspective of a good-hearted mid-20th century liberal, he thought it would be a good way to solve our problems. It can also be a good way. It can also be a good way to eliminate things that certain speakers don't want. And that brings me back to Hobbes. All of us here share an interest in Hobbes. Hobbes begins his discussion of speech in the Leviathan by saying it is speech which distinguishes us from the animals, something that he would have read in Aristotle's Politics. and elsewhere, and he explains how, therefore, we're able to make proposals, how we're able to plan, how we're able to have community projects, etc., all because of speech. About 50 or 60 pages later, he returns to speech and explains, how many?
I'm just mumbling, it's like 100 pages.
He returns to the topic, and he says, but of course speech also is the cause of all our evils, because speech is what allows us to deceive our wives and husbands. It allows us to act in counterfeit ways in business transactions. It's what allows nations to betray other nations. These two narratives about speech, that it is productive of capabilities and capacities that animals don't have, and that it is the seed of possible destruction, are both true. And that's what we're dealing with all the time.
Get your tickets for the world's largest music and philosophy festival at HowTheLightGetsIn.org.